Hello everyone, welcome to the second installment of the recent batch of Quadrant Consulting webinars. Today's topic is about the marketing operating model. Interesting topic, a lot of things to unpack, and we're going to cover quite a lot of things in this webinar. My name is Mikkel. I'm a partner here at Quadrant, part of the marketing practice, and I've been studying, practicing, and consulting and training within the topic of marketing for the last more than 15 years. And I'm going to be your host today. Maybe for those of you that don't know Quadrant, I'm just going to briefly introduce us as a company. So we are a consultancy focused on growth and go-to-market efforts. So we basically serve different types of sales, marketing, commercial excellence functions, helping them accelerate growth and develop new capabilities. We are operating out of the Nordics, but serving a lot of different companies across most of Europe. And today we're going to talk about marketing operating models, and we also have done a lot of work within this space. So a lot of the stuff we'll see today is basically also building on that work. So some of the typical stuff we do is helping companies assess the current marketing capabilities. We also help design and implement new marketing operating models. We'll get back to what that means. We'll also go more deep and narrow on process design, and finally also help companies reinvent how do they do marketing planning, especially let's say in a global and local context. So we have a fair amount of experience in this topic, and I'm going to share some of those insights throughout today's presentation. Marketing operating model. In a few seconds, I'll unpack what that actually means. But it's very important to say that this is a very broad topic. So full disclaimer here. We're not going to cover all the ins and outs of what a marketing operating model can entail, what are the different scenarios, and also the different variances of this model, depending on the type of company you are and how you're set up. So we're going to focus on some of the core pieces, and then we're going to go deep on a few themes that we believe are essential for most companies, and hopefully you'll be able to have some clear takeaways and can mirror yourself in those two topics that we're going to go deep in. And then this is the first presentation you've probably seen in a few years from consultancy where we won't talk about Gen AI at all. So that's also a little bit of a giveaway here, and then you'll see a lot of dense slides, but hopefully you will recover from this session as well. We're going to introduce what a marketing operating model is. We're also going to talk about what is called the new marketing paradigm. That's really the backdrop of a lot of the things we'll discuss today, and then we're going to deep dive on two emerging themes we believe are necessary for all, if not most, marketing leaders to consider. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about how to actually transform towards a new target operating model within marketing. We'll have a small Q&A session in the end. So why do we need to talk about such a fancy word as an operating model? Isn't it just about executing? Sometimes it actually is. And we'll draw this small 2x2 that you see on the left here, where we on the x-axis has sort of marketing complexity, and on the y-axis marketing organizational size. And to be frank, if you're operating in a low complexity environment, you might be a one-product company, and you have a fairly sort of small team all sitting together in a global function. Marketing operating model is too big a word to throw around, and I wouldn't waste a lot of time on it. It's really just about execution. But as your organization and your marketing engine grows in complexity and size, you start to see some bumps on the road, right? You've probably all been there where things start to get a little bit bumpy. You might introduce another product line, or you go into new geographies, or you extend the scope of what marketing can actually do in terms of capability. All those dimensions adds complexity to the mix. And if we're not completely sure about how we run our engine, things starts to get bumpy. And that escalates further on as complexity increases. And if we're not fully aware about how to run our organization across global and local and across product line and interfacing with a lot of neighboring functions within the company, we can really start to see a major drop in marketing efficiency. So the work we've done, but also effectiveness, right? Are we doing the right things from the get-go? So marketing operating model is really at the core of it about how do we get the work done and how do we create value. So it's the machinery, so to say. And it's especially relevant for you guys working in global organizations, complex structures, multiple subdivisions of product lines, extensive interactions with the rest of the business, of course, also a big topic here, right? And rely on a lot of input in order for you guys to create value for internal or external customers. And it's important to say, you have an operating model, whether that's formalized or not. That's basically the case for most companies. And why is an operating model, which is basically the engine of marketing, right? We'll define it more narrowly and more thoroughly in a few seconds. But why is that especially important for marketing? I think one of the key premises here is that marketing as an organization is somewhat has sort of an open API to the rest of the organization. A lot of other parts of the organization work very narrowly with a few other neighboring functions, but marketing is actually interacting and engaging with a lot of different stakeholders outside marketing. It might be product development, HR, communication, could also be the leadership team, of course, sales, and increasingly IT. So all of these functions marketing needs to interface with. And then within marketing, you also have this, at least in a lot of organizations, big organizations, the global local dimension to it as well. So all this complexity calls for a sort of a proper, well-designed and implemented operating model that allows us to do great work within this framework, so to say. But it's also important to say, we'll get to the definition of an operating model in a few seconds, but an operating model is not a strategy. So the way we've defined it here is there's like a cascade from your strategy or your marketing strategy, which in many ways shapes your core capabilities. So which capabilities should we have in marketing? What is our mandate? How do we create value? Where do we go as a function? And again, those core capabilities also shape how we should operate as a function. So strategy drives capabilities, capabilities drives operating model. So operating model is really the engine that allows you to deliver in many ways on your strategy, but it's not a strategy. That's very important. And what are some of the key questions that defining and refining your operating model actually allows you to answer? It's really about clarifying what is the role of marketing inside the organization, right? How do we collaborate with adjacent functions? It might be IT, sales, so on. To what extent should marketing be centralized or decentralized? A very big topic. What is the geographical scope of marketing ops, for example? Which activities should we outsource? Also, how deliberate are we about the things we're outsourcing and the things we're insourcing? How should we structure our organization from, again, global to local? And how do we define and measure success? So a lot of topics falls under the banner of marketing operating model. We'll try to cover a few of them today. So what is a marketing operating model? It's a sort of a framework, right? It's a structure that allows you to operate in many ways. It provides guidance on how to deploy resources, how you organize, how processes should run, and which objectives, of course, to reach. It's very important to say that it should also be highly customized. And I think the more companies I work with, the more humble I also become, in the sense that all companies are different for different reasons, operate in different industries, different macroeconomic environments, different footprints, different profitability levels, and marketing also, to a large extent, play different roles depending on which company you are in. So it needs to be customizable. And then again, coming back to my former point, it's in many ways a bridge from strategy to operations. So for a lot of your colleagues that has more hands-on responsibility sitting inside marketing, doing work, working on the marketing operating model is actually, to them, much more meaningful than talking about sort of high-level strategic concepts, because this is really where the strategy and the rubber hits the road, so to say, for a lot of the people working inside marketing. So again, what is a marketing operating model? It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So there is no marketing operating model to rule them all. And if someone tells you there is, they are bullshitting. For sure, it needs to be tailored to the context. It's not strategy as well, right? So strategic choices, where to play, how to win, all those things guides and shapes the operating model, but it's not part of developing and refining an operating model. Operating model is also not about tactics. It's not about whether we should do Facebook posts or not. It's the wheel, it's the grind, it's the engine, but it's not about which tactics we should deploy. And then finally, and we get back to this topic, it's not static. So it's not just quote unquote a project and a blueprint which should sit on the wall like a printout. It's a dynamic dynamic beast, so to say, that evolves with the business and as the business evolves. So what are some of the typical elements you would cover when we talk marketing operating model? And it all depends on the company, to be frank, because not all of these topics are important to all companies. So, but this is a little bit of a world map for you to look at when we're talking about what is a marketing operating model. Some of the topics typically included is questions about structure, right? What is the organizational logic in marketing, centralization versus decentralization, governance as well, and so on. Of course, also processes, right, from the more sort of important big ticket ones, annual planning, but all the way down to product commercialization, lead management, and the likes. It also covers people, right? Because we talk about structure and processes, we also need to, of course, populate these structures with some people and the right people. So what are the roles? What are the responsibilities of those roles? How do we develop talent? How do we ensure that people are paid according to effort and skills and so on? And then finally, I think one of the even more interesting topics in the era of marketing that we're in right now is also, of course, also technology. So how do we make sure that we have technology in place that underpins our strategy, supports our processes, and empowers our people? How do we collaborate with IT, for example? And how do we ensure that we can measure success from all the investments we're doing? So a lot of topics can be put into this bucket of marketing operating model. We're not going to cover all of it today, but it's basically at the core of it about setting up the engine that allows you to deliver value as an organization. And it's not to brag, but at least just provide a little bit of credibility in this topic. And we've done a fair amount of work here in Kvadrant around marketing operating models and have worked across different industries, from assessing, designing, and implementing operating models. And that goes for heavy industry, medtech, software, consulting, logistics, and so on. And again, a lot of the stuff you'll see today is building on some of that work. Yes. Before we dive into some of the interesting developments that we see within the topic of operating model, I think it's also fair to say that we also need to understand where's marketing actually going as a discipline and as a function, because that's, again, really the backdrop that will shape a lot of the sort of cogwheels that go into designing a new operating model. One of the observations we've done, and this is a bit of a caricature, and some of you might feel under attack here. That's really not the point. It's just a bit of observations from a lot of work and working with a lot of different teams. And a lot of the insights you'll see in a few minutes does not necessarily apply to all of you. But nevertheless, there is a general, I think, observation on our side that marketing has in many ways moved on, right, from 20 years ago, especially in the B2B domain, where we are much more sort of tech empowered, right? A lot of the marketing we do is much more data enabled, and we can apply intelligence in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways we bring new solutions to market and so on. So marketing is in many ways evolving. One of the, at least, observation on our side is, yet still the operating playbook we are applying in a lot of marketing organizations is still built for what I would call a bygone era, right? So we're a little bit the horse carriage on the highway here, right? So marketing is moving on, but we're still applying a playbook for another era. And what is the new marketing mandate? So some of the things we're seeing is that we are moving away from these very slow, long-term innovation and launch funnels to much more rapid test and learn, right? Testing concepts early, emphasizing speed to market, changing things on the get-go based on the feedback we get from how things are doing out in the marketplace. We're also moving more and more away from time-bound campaigns to what we call always-on revenue program, and that doesn't mean that things shouldn't be creative, but it also means that this idea of launching a product in a 3-month window and then going completely silent does not really map well onto how customers are actually buying. So more and more companies are adopting much more of what I call always-on revenue programs instead of these boom and burst campaigns. Personalization always also a thing. I think probably reality is lagging a little bit behind a lot of the preaching here, but we're starting to see more and more value from personalization, and also with the rise of Gen AI. Okay, I mentioned Gen AI. That's the last time I'll do that today. You can also industrialize and implement personalization at scale. So that's also something that's happening, of course. We're also getting the opportunity to an increasing extent be able to measure the impact of marketing and show a return on investment. Not always easy, but we're getting there. And then finally, of course, the rise of e-commerce. Sometimes that also sits in marketing organizations. So suddenly we have a direct impact on revenue, and there's a clear line of sight from what we do to exact revenue. Yet the operating playbook that a lot of marketing organizations are still adhering to is still, I would say, is slightly outdated for different reasons. We're still somewhat adhering to slow development processes, lengthy campaign processes, right, based on rigid workflows, handovers from team to team, and with a lot of loss of speed and loss of knowledge between these different handovers, right? We're starting to gear up on resources, but a lot of those resources are trapped in a lot of organizational silos, far away from execution and value creation, and not necessarily creating value because they are not in the trenches with where things actually happens. A lot of the structures, I think, in marketing organization, ways of working are rigid and also a legacy product of an old way of working where it was all about sort of developing a brochure, developing a campaign, going to a trade fair, right? Linear ways of working. And then I think we're all seeing this, and across a lot of different customers, that we are not seeing the return from the investment in marketing technology that was sort of promised by the tech vendors and so on. So there's also a little bit of backlash against marketing technology, and we're not seeing the value that we hope for. And then I think, and this is a bit of a pet peeve on my side here, that a lot of local and global marketing organizations are still working too disconnected and misaligned in many ways. And there's a lot of waste and frustration and loss of speed due to that. So new marketing mandate, a little bit of an outdated operating playbook. And that's some of the stuff we'll cover today. I'm gonna dive into two themes that we see at a lot of in a lot of companies, and there's a lot more to this topic of marketing operating model. So I'm completely transparent about that, but I'm gonna dive into these themes because they are somewhat universal. The first is new capabilities, changing structures, partnerships, and ways of working. And the second one is getting global and local right. So let's open each of those up and go through some of the main points. Yes, what are some of the common issues that we're seeing within this topic of new capabilities, changing structures, partnership, and new ways of working? And it's, of course, largely related to digitalization of marketing. But the challenge is, with all the promises and all the potential of digitalization of marketing, we're still seeing a lot of sort of gravel in the machinery when it comes to executing on those promises. The collaboration with IT not always as easy as it should be or as fast as it should be. We fail to see the return from a lot of the marketing investments that are being done. Agency collaborations not always working optimally either. Also a lot of broken promises and a feeling that we're paying too much for subpar products. Data foundation also somewhat broken, right? Data is the oxygen of a lot of the things we talked about earlier. And if the foundation is not in place and the quality of the data and transparency in data is not in place, it's really difficult to act on it. And then, of course, our ways of working, that we see a need for agility, experimentation, speed to market, but extremely difficult to get that those operating practices put into place due to legacy structures, ways of working, and so on. So there's a couple of issues here that is really shaping this agenda, and that's some of the stuff we hope to tackle with some of the topics we'll cover in a few minutes. And I think the backdrop for this topic is really the changing capabilities that is happening in marketing. And when I started in B2B marketing 15 or 17 years ago now, I don't know how far, it was really sort of about mastering 3 disciplines. There's a strategic element to it, right? We need to make sure that we have a proper go-to-market plans and strategies in place. There's a creative element to it, and then there's a media element to it. Largely offline, and a little bit of online. But it was a sort of a static media planning exercise, typically outsourced to a media agency, and off we go. And then I've found this capability map of a modern marketing organization in a B2B context, right? Expanding on all parameters, right? We are seeing more and more different capabilities needed, more and more specialized roles, more and more technical roles needed to deliver on the promise of digitalization. So we're going from a little bit of a simplistic reality where marketing was also, fair to say, in a lot of organizations, acting more as a supplier or sales support function, to a new reality. On the new delivering on the new marketing mandate, that there's a need for complete new capabilities and a lot of interdependencies between these different people working in this organization. So new capabilities, increased specialization, more technical competences, a lot of interdependencies between the people putting these capabilities into place. That's the backdrop. But what is actually what is then happening? One trend that we're clearly seeing is that there is a increased need and drive towards in-housing. So I talked to it a little bit before, right? Where in the old world, a lot of the creative work was outsourced to agencies, a lot of the media work were outsourced to media planning agencies. But as we're moving into this quote-unquote new world, or we're already here, but we need to get more out of it, where data takes up, of course, much more time, and the increasing need for technical skills and so on is needed. What we're generally seeing across the board is also an increased need and drive towards in-housing. Okay, and it's not just about agencies. There's also tech vendors and all different sorts, but a lot of these capabilities are being brought in-house. So that, of course, also changes how we operate as a function and how we configure the function. And I just want to highlight some of the key parameters that are typically insourced. It's not necessarily the big creative ideas, some of the strategic planning. We also get a lot of support from agencies and so on, concept development, identity work, whatnot. But when it comes down to some of the more sort of scrappy, dynamic content that needs to be released with much higher frequency, ongoingly optimized, and so on, that lends itself better for in-housing due to the speed and frequency needed. Data ownership and management, also sometimes that actually set among agencies, right? So the data ownership or the platform management set among with the agencies, but that's increasingly being brought in-house. Ability to measure impact, of course, you need to control that for sure. And then, of course, governing and operating and maintaining all the marketing technology, and increasingly also media planning and optimization as we're moving towards some of these more dynamic, easy-to-use platforms. It's less about negotiation with the media or sort of relationship-based media buying. It's much more plug and play through digital marketing channels. So a lot of these capabilities are brought in-house, and that, of course, also changes how marketing organizations should operate. And one of the key things that we're also seeing is that also means that more and more marketing organizations are reinventing how they're actually organized, where they used to be in what I call B2B marketing 2.0, where digitalization of marketing was still in its just getting started. A lot of marketing organizations were organized around some clear sort of specialized disciplines or tactics, right? Digital marketing, comms, content, and so on, much more like a factory line. And that way of working, where things flow linearly through the factory line, fit very well with this old school way of thinking about campaigns. But what we're seeing is more and more and more organizations adopting a much more sort of multidisciplinary lens, where you assign a multidisciplinary team to certain outcomes or segments, and then you empower those teams with, of course, the mandate to act under the sort of mantra of we build it, we own it, right? And it could be segments, it could be funding stages, whatnot, but really blending resources much better and allowing for full autonomy to execute, right? And then, of course, on top of that, also building on a little bit of agile principles. There might be some sort of communities or guilds where functional people, it might be that if they're sitting paid media specialists in different teams, they can come together and cultivate that discipline in a different context. But actually, teams sitting together, increasingly becoming multidisciplinary in order to steer everything end to end and execute without a lot of dependencies. And that allows, of course, for agility, speed, and so on. And that also changes how a lot of marketing organizations actually work, because again, 15, 20 years ago, and I also spent a lot of years at an agency, a lot of the work that we did together with clients was very linear, right? From marketing manager doing a briefing copywriter, doing the writing, contacting the graphic designer to put some pictures on it, right? It's sort of a typical linear campaign flow, or whether to create a brochure on campaign, or it could also be go to an event, similar idea. Linear manner, things getting handed over from team to team. And that doesn't work anymore. And of course, we talked about it from a structural point of view, but increasingly it also means that the way we actually run marketing programs, it's going much more towards these always-on, iterative, primarily digital programs that allows, of course, for instant feedback on what's working, testing, experimentation, and then again, provide the autonomy and the capabilities for the team to act on it, instead of trying to restart this very linear, somewhat slow process. So structures are changing, and hopefully also ways of working are changing based on what's going on and the new marketing mandate. So under this umbrella of new capabilities, primarily building on the digitalization of marketing, one of the things that we're also seeing is that there is a bit of a backlash on marketing technology. I think we've all promised 5 years ago that suddenly marketing organizations were spending more on IT than IT organizations were, and the future of marketing is technology-based. I think I'm a little bit of a tech optimist, but long-term, but short-term, a little bit more pessimistic here. I'm failing to see that a lot of these investments in very, very expensive, sophisticated technology pays off. And the research is starting to support that point as well. So what we're seeing is that CMOs under pressure to show returns on investment technology. And it's not due to the fact that the technology is not capable, but there's simply not enough resources. Data is holding them back, lack of discipline in setting KPIs, and so on. So yes, a lot of money has been spent on this thing, but we're not seeing the return that we hoped for. And in this context, and also in the context of a new marketing operating model, sort of target operating model, I think we're also seeing a new paradigm on how to deploy marketing technology, where the focus is much more on which processes should the technology actually support, instead of buying technology and then trying to retrofit our processes to fit whatever new piece of technology we have bought. Shifting spend also away from spending a lot of money on new technology to hiring people that can actually use the technology, to training people to be able to use the technology, and so on. And then I think a simpler technology base, less tools, less sophisticated tools even, that are much more no-code, easy to configure, right? You don't want a local marketing team with 3 people having to contact a developer just to send out an email that invites people to an event. They should be empowered to use the technology. So empowering the user, not relying on expensive developers to get any value out of the marketing technology. And that is also in many ways changing the setup around how we work with IT, because I think 10 years ago, your classical IT collaborators were sort of responsible for a lot of the work, whereas marketing started to do a little bit of shadow IT, right? All the things that you had to do, but didn't tell IT anything about. And now we're starting to see a power balance where IT resources are actually being moved into marketing. So, right, we'll still have slow IT project, ERP, supply chain, master data, and then you have what we call a fast fast IT, usually sitting in marketing. It can be all things web, CRM, automation, and so on. Right, not strictly sort of business critical, but extremely important for marketing to master and have control over in order to be able to experiment and move fast. So the IT setup is also changing, right? And more IT skills, capabilities are now being placed inside marketing. Another topic which is important under this way of working banner is the relationship with agencies, and I think we've seen that there's a little bit of a broken relationship to a large extent, because, and I think it goes both ways in many ways. Agencies are used as suppliers, right, that are tapping into a linear process, developing a very fixed product, and hoping they'll do everything correctly within that very linear process. But again, this sort of Mad Men style kind of workflow where there's a big concept, see you in 4 weeks, and then we start to visualize how it could look in elements, see you in 4 weeks, and then we start to develop elements. It's not really fit for purpose, again, on the backdrop of new ways of working. So our point here is there's a need to reinvent the relationship between agencies and companies, and there's definitely a role for agencies, very important to say, but it also needs to change how we work with agencies. They need to be much more embedded inside the organization. They need to be seen as equal partners, not just a supplier, right? Remuneration might need to change a little bit. So instead of hourly rates, it could also be outcome-based and so on. They need to have access to the data that customers, the companies are relying on in order to execute digital marketing programs. And then, of course, the whole communication flow between agencies and companies needs to change, where these account managers are not sort of the single point of contact, but much more direct, real-time interaction between different specialists working on the agency side and the company side, right? So a new way of working with agencies, a new role of agencies in this, I think, in this new context as well. But there's definitely a need to reinvent it. So that was topic number one, and I'm gonna cover the next topic now, which is getting global and local right. Why is this topic so interesting? And I think it's from an organizational viewpoint, this is one of the most interesting topics, because there's so much, I think, value to be created here, because this misalignment between global and local organization really leads to a lot of waste. Global teams developing a lot of materials that are not necessarily used by local teams. A lot of setbacks in processes, so processes are too long and longer than they need to be due to lack of involvement and alignment of local marketing organization, for example. Lack of proper discussions around how do we deploy resources and prioritize different markets, which of course, if we don't take those choices up front, it also leads to a lot of challenges downstream from those. And then, of course, lack of uniformity in the way we work across product lines or brands and across different geographies, of course, makes it super difficult to industrialize and hardwire processes, because everyone is sort of on their own. And then there's, I think, a lot of room also to make sure that we share knowledge and share experiences across different parts of the organization, both globally and locally. So I think a lot of things to be addressed. You might be able to mirror your organization in some of these trends, but it's a big topic of ours, and I think there's a lot of work that can be done, and it's a bit of a pet peeve of Quadrant here. So what's going on? I think a trend line that's more or less been true for 10 years is that globalization, to a large extent, is driving digitalization, which is to a large extent driving centralization. Because when we start to digitalize marketing, we start to see a need for more specialized skills, right? And in order for us to hire those people, make sure they have enough work to do, and make sure that we're actually delivering on it and not just sort of spreading marketing managers way too thinly, we need to create these centers of excellence, which typically sits in a central organization. So digitalization is driving centralization. That's a general trend. But it's also important to say that's not necessarily the whole answer, right? So let's try to unpack what's going on below the surface here. One of the things that we're pretty focused on is to be deliberate about the extent of centralization versus decentralization. And again, the more companies I work with, the more answers there is to this question. So I'm completely open to any perspective, right? I don't want to say all companies should centralize. Most companies should probably centralize some of these things that are very distributed today, but it depends on the nature of the industry, of the market, of the types of customers you're actually serving. Which type of marketing you're doing, is it mostly offline or is it more online? And then the level of technology and sophistication you have in marketing, right? So a lot of these different parameters also shapes to what extent you should centralize and decentralize. And what we're seeing is that maybe companies has never sort of deliberately placed themselves on a lot of these parameters. And it's a little bit of sort of completely emergent how things are actually done based on a little bit of haggling between global and local organizations. But there is actually a way here, there's a point in being a little bit fact-based about what is the ideal centralization versus decentralization span for the company in question. And that should also in many ways drive many things. It should drive which capabilities do we place in the global organization, which do we place in the local organization, how do we then structure, how do we drive our budgeting and planning processes, and all these things. So it's a major thing to sort out before we start to talk about capabilities, structures, and team composition and so on. A couple of different models could be that a decentral model is that regional marketing is more or less the sole driver, right? Corporate marketing is a support function. So trying to industrialize things, acting as a shared service center, developing materials that are requested or campaigns that are requested by local organizations. And then the other part of the spectrum, you have much more of a centralized setup where regional marketing is much more of a sales supporting resource, and everything else is more or less handled by the global organization, and a lot of the budget sits in the global organization. And then for probably 80% of companies, they sit somewhere in between, and it's not as black and white whether are you decentralized or centralized, right? It's probably somewhere in the hybrid domain, so to say, right? And that really becomes a much more sort of interesting discussion. What is the role of field and regional marketing versus global marketing? And how do we look at all the different capabilities and things that need to be done? And how do we make sure that they sit at the right place? So that map, extremely important to draw, but of course, based on a high level conceptual idea about what is the ideal level of centralization versus decentralization for the company. And then it comes down to some of the practical things. How do we then size and configure our local marketing organization? Because one of the things we see a lot is there is no real blueprint for local marketing organizations. So they are set up in completely different ways. They are sized in different ways. They are structured in different ways. They have completely different capabilities depending on maybe the whims of the local GM or the skills of the local marketing leader and so on. So having a much more, I think, firm blueprint on how to configure local marketing organizations also allows for a lot more uniformity in the way we work and right sizing of the organizations to be fair. Right? And it might be that some of the biggest markets, or one of the biggest markets, typically the US, if you're talking European companies, are allowed to operate as a full stack marketing organization, more or less relying only on global marketing for support. Then you will have a big group of mid-markets, which in all of them put together takes up 80% of or 70% of revenue or something like this, where you'll have a range of marketing managers, but also maybe a few specialists depending on the priorities, right? It might be a digital marketing specialist, of course, but they would need to rely on the global team for a lot of the much more technical and specialized things, and they also rely on the global team for proper planning and campaigns and whatnot. And then there's probably a long tail of markets. It might be distributor markets or much smaller markets, or markets in developed countries where the marketing playbook needs to be much more simpler, where they most likely just need a few marketing coordinators, putting a lot of the work that's been done at a global level, putting that to work, so to say. So firming up, how do we see the world? To what extent do we centralize versus decentralize, and how do we then create proper blueprints for our local organization so it's not completely improvised market by market? It's also a very fruitful exercise. Another big unlock for a lot of organizations, and it's super simple, but actually something a lot of organizations are struggling with, is to instill and implement a proper marketing planning cycle. And it sounds so simple, but it's actually quite difficult to do, especially in a global high complexity environment. And why is a proper planning cycle important? Well, first and foremost, I think it allows for much more sort of collaboration between different teams. But this is really the bedrock for strategic alignment. And strategic alignment, if you get that in place, a lot of the things that follows downstream, from which campaigns do we run, which audience do we target, which tactics and channels are most important, all those things flows from those strategic plans. So getting this in place is definitely one of the big unlocks if you don't have it already. And there's a lot of ways to do this, and this is a simple framework from a client of ours where the planning cycle basically includes 3 phases, where there is a sort of global plan developed together with the business. There's a lot of different product lines in this company. It could also be brands, right? So we look backwards into the business and say what is actually important from a corporate strategy, product level, and so on. All those things, top-down information, of course, need to inform the priorities of the global organization. And then based on that, of course, define a central marketing plan. But all those, once you start to put things together, that should, of course, also be informed bottom up by regional priorities, things that you will never see in the global plan. All those regional differences need to be captured through proper input by regional marketing. So it goes sort of all the way down, and then it triggers all the way up. So once you get that input, you can start to, again, dive into developing regional marketing plan. But of course, the regional marketing team and the regions should also be a part of developing the global plan. So again, there's a lot of mechanics and tools needed to support something like this, but this way of ensuring that we align to the priorities of the business top down, but also getting bottom up feedback and instilling a cadence and a mechanism that allows us at an annual and sort of with an annual rhythm, put these plans together. That's really a major unlock, and it's super simple. It does not need to be rocket science, really, but it's such a big unlock because a lot of the things that follows downstream from this depends on that strategic alignment, which this type of plan allows for, so to say. So that is a really big unlock. Back to this global local thing, a big headache of a lot of our clients is the dotted line, right? The famous dotted line between global marketing leaders and regional marketing leaders. And a lot of the input we get, and also when we assess it together with companies, is that this quote-unquote dotted line is usually broken, because it's super difficult for these regional marketeers to understand who's really my master, who do I cater to, how do I make sure that the stuff I'm doing is acknowledged and I'm delivering on my targets and all that. So what they usually end up doing is largely serving the local GM or local sales leader, because that's the person that is closest to them. And then this alignment with the global team is a little bit of an afterthought. And that's, of course, Super annoying for global teams, of course, because we want to make sure that all the great stuff we're doing from a global and central level is actually put to use. And it, of course, creates a lot of friction in the collaboration and relationship between local and global organizations. So what is there actually to do? And I think there's a lot of things that have been tried and tested, and this is an age-old headache. It's not about digitalization. Actually, it's been around for many years. And we've sort of come to the conclusion that a good way to go about it is to split up leadership responsibility of local marketeers. And what does that mean? So this is actually McKinsey who developed a really good concept called the Helix organization, where you split up the leadership of local managers. And in the context of a local marketing leader, what does that mean? The big sort of problem statement is that the local sales manager, GM, is actually not an ideal manager for a local marketing leader. They are good at making sort of short-term priorities, making sure that we go to the right events and that the alignment and relationship with the sales team is good. But they actually, the thing is, very few local GMs or sales leaders actually know what good marketing is. So they are not a good sort of functional leader, a capability leader, someone that can coach them on good marketing. And they are also not able to question what good marketing actually is. So that's a challenge, right? So what we would suggest is to actually investigate whether it's possible to split up leadership, the leadership of local marketing leaders into two distinct responsibilities. The first one is saying you need a capability leader. You need someone that can help you increase your functional excellence, so be a better marketeer. Also define a career path actually, and understand how to collaborate with the rest of the marketing organization. This hat should actually also entail hiring and firing responsibilities. So the CMO is a capability leader of a local marketing leader. The CMO should be able to hire and fire that person, because the CMO is probably the only one who actually knows what good looks like. Okay? But that doesn't mean the CMO should take up sort of full responsibility for the leadership of the local marketing leader, because a lot of the things that needs to be managed and a lot of the sort of decisions and trade-offs and so on are much more day-to-day and requires that frontline presence. And that should be the role of the local sales leader, okay? Making priorities in terms of which segments to focus on, which activities to drive, which events to go to. All those things sits really well with the local sales leader. But the sort of the development and the functional excellence sits much better with the global CMO. So splitting up the responsibility of leadership into two distinct, not talking about dotted line or full line, the very vague definitions is a really intelligent way to set up the right system here, because at least my experience is that a lot of companies are really struggling with this dotted line setup. So we introduced what is a marketing operating model, what are all the different pieces of this process, and you could open up endless stream of trends and themes. We just looked at two that we see across the board: new capabilities, new ways of working, new ways of structuring the marketing organization, of course, mostly driven by digitalization. And then secondly, some pieces of the puzzle that allows you to hopefully firm up this global and local relationship, which is so important in order for us to get the most out of all the big investments we're doing in terms of developing global campaigns, tools, assets, and driving global product launches and so on. So that's two of the topics we chose to focus on, but there's much more to it. And again, I have total respect for this exercise of talking about marketing operating models, and it's not necessarily all these things apply to all of you, but hopefully it gave a little bit of food for thought. Before we go to the Q&A, I just want to talk a little bit about, I can see myself in a lot of these issues that you mentioned, Mikkel. I can also aspire to adopt some of these practices driven by digitalization or reinventing the relationship between the global and local marketing organization. But what do I actually do? High level process, I would at least consider, if I were you, to follow would look something like this. There's a pre-design phase. So before we start to talk about what is actually the target operating model, how should we look? It's all about understanding where we're actually coming from. And this is, again, all about ensuring that we have a proper strategy in place, a capability map. And where are we today? Understanding the outset to a large extent. It's also about setting up the organization around a project like this. I'll share in a few minutes some considerations, but it's super important to have the right involvement. This should not be an ivory tower exercise done sort of in isolation by 3 people from corporate, right? Really making sure that you have set up the right team around a task like this. And then also developing, I would call a change story, making sure that the change story is in place, because there's going to be a big part of project like this would be change management, and don't put too little emphasis on this topic. Making sure that we have that change story in place is super important. That's part of the pre-design. Designing it, of course, some more mechanical stuff, making sure that you define your design principles. What are we trying to achieve? Which principles do we bring into the design exercise? Developing value streams to understand what work is actually being done. How do we do that in a better way? What needs to go out? What is not important? All the way to setting up the proper governance structures, roles, responsibilities, ways of working, and making sure that you also map out how technology and data, of course, should be in place. But of course, there's a lot of work here, but there's a little bit more mechanical work that needs to be done by the team you defined in the pre-design phase. And then I think in terms of implementation, again, this should not be like a dead PowerPoint deck. At least it should be dynamic for sure, right? So making sure that we're not just treating it as development of a big PowerPoint deck, we release it and then we go back to our normal work. It's a start. It's really about changing practices, changing how people work. And you're going to see resistance. You're going to see some people absorbing it, some people adhering to it, some of the stuff working, some of the stuff might not be working. So start to pilot some of these concepts that you identified or designed in the prior phase and put those to work, and then slowly and incrementally sort of let them settle, right? And start to introduce more and more of these aspects. It's really not a 6-week project where you design some PowerPoint templates and hope for the best. There is an element of leaning into the design phase and doing thorough work here, and that's also where we do a lot of our work. But in terms of implementation, start to pilot some of these concepts. No, don't just release a presentation and hope for the best. And then instill some sort of fixed cadence on how to make adaptations, collect feedback from new structures, new ways of working. How are all those things creating value? Where's the frictions? What is the good things? And that fixed cadence should allow you to ongoingly develop your marketing operating model. Again, it's not a project. It's really good to get started and do the groundwork, but it needs to develop and evolve on an ongoing basis. And you, of course, also need to design your process that allow in a way that allows for that, so to say. So before we go to the Q&A, I just want to share a few considerations, at least on our side, based on doing work within this topic and things you can consider if you are to venture into this territory. First and foremost, remember that you need to get the foundation in place, right? There's no marketing operating model without a strategy. Then there's the roadmap piece. Again, break it down into small pieces. Ensure piloting and ongoing implementation. This is not a fire and forget exercise. Involve people, make it inclusive, co-design, get people also that are working inside this machine, so to say, involved in the process. Don't make it an ivory tower exercise. But I still see there's a lot of top-down decisions in terms of governance, level of decentralization, and so on, that needs to be taken also by leadership to ensure that holistic understanding and alignment at a leadership level. Because again, a lot of the things you'll do in terms of processes and tools and so on that follows downstream from these big decisions. If we just sort of ignore those big decisions and slip over them and hope they will solve themselves, a lot of the stuff that happens downstream is not going to work. So hard questions, tackle those early together with executive management. And then a few more pointers here, right? I would always advise you to embed training also as part of rolling out this new way of working on new practices, new processes, new tools and whatnot. Training is a super powerful, I think, change lever, and it really empowers people to put a lot of these things to use. So also embed that as an active part of the program. Of course, also make sure that you're not in direct conflict with the operating model of the wider company, right? Because you also have colleagues that are developing products and whatnot, right? So make sure that you're not in direct conflict with how other functions are working as well. And then, of course, make sure to put emphasis on change management. This can and will probably mean a lot of changes for a lot of people. So yeah, as always, really never forget that part. It's not just an intellectual exercise. You need to also address the hard part of the equation and the emotional part of the equation as well. So there's a big element of change. So yes, that was it. A little bit over time. I think we have a few minutes. I'm just gonna look whether there's any questions here. We have a few minutes. That's all. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let's see. Will you share the slides after the webinar? We always get that one. Usually we don't, but reach out if there's anything of a specific concern of yours. Then we might do a bit of a bargain. But I won't send all the slides just as it is right now. No. But feel free to, of course, reach out and we'll figure something out. No problem. Regarding marketing operations, where do you find inspiration and thought leadership on the area? Any books to read or people to follow? I personally, I follow a few people on LinkedIn. I don't know how specific it is, but there is a big community around marketing ops. I think I actually did a slide on it. I took it out because I had way too many slides, so you can already sense that. But I think marketing ops together with insights is one of the emerging functions that are really gonna be super important to implement and master in the years to come. And I think that function in its own right is so important to capture and address a lot of these challenges. Own the operating model, make sure that the budgeting and planning cycle is in place, making sure that we're getting a proper investment and getting that alignment across a lot of specialized functions, but also global and local entities. So I don't necessarily have a lot of good things. I just want to build on adding more sort of support to this point that marketing ops is going to be even more important going forward. But I don't have any specific people or follow books to recommend, unfortunately. So. That's it. Yeah, hard pressed on time. Thank you for taking the time. It was fun. Always nice to look into a screen for a full hour here. I hope some real people were on the other side. I had fun. This is an interesting topic. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or you want inspiration on how to do it, or want support on developing a new target operating model. Of course, we also do a lot of work in this space. So anything, reach out. If not, have a great day and great week. Bye-bye.